Hello, and welcome to DevOps Talks. Today, we've got a fireside chat with some feature flag experts. But first, I'm Ian Buchanan. I'm Principal Partner Engineer at Atlassian. And I'm really excited to have this chat because over the last few months in my role as Partner Engineer, I've worked with all of these companies in helping build integrations that are now available on the Atlassian marketplace. So I'd like to give my friends here a chance to introduce themselves, and we'll start with Connor.
Hi, everybody. My name is Connor Ness, Solutions Engineer here at Harness, and I'm based in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
David.
Yeah, my name is David Burrows. I'm a software engineer at Split Software, located in the San Francisco Bay Area.
Cody.
My name is Cody DeArkland. I look after developer relations, and I'm with Launch Darkly, and I am in sunny California around Sacramento.
Jakan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jakan Wang. I lead our enterprise engineering team. I'm located in the sunny Seattle.
Great, thanks. So we've just gotten through introductions, and I'm going to continue with a little bit of housekeeping. Then we'll get into our fireside chat, have some hot topics for you. And then towards the end, we'll definitely have some time for questions. Hopefully we can get to all the answers. First, I want to have people interact with us. Please submit your questions using the Q&A widget. If we don't get to all of your questions at the end during the Q&A, we will follow up after the webinar. We'll be posting things on the community site. And of course, by popular demand, everybody asks, we will be recording this webinar, and we'll send you the webinar link and additional resources a few days after the event. A quick tech tip is that there isn't any dial-in number. So the webcast is streamed through your computer only. For best audio quality, please adjust your volume, make sure that you can hear all of the speakers here. So with that, let's get into the chat. I want to start with an explanation of feature flags as I understand them. But what I've learned working with all of these partners is that my understanding may be a bit out of date. So first, let's kind of go back. I first learned about feature flags from the continuous delivery book. And even before feature flags, it describes a mechanism called blue-green deployments, which use a load balancer to switch traffic into a blue environment, for example, might be your current production environment, so that green is a safe environment to deploy into. And then as you decide it's time to release, you switch the load balancer, and suddenly your traffic is going into a new environment, and the other one becomes a place that is safe to deploy into. I feel like feature flags are a kind of logical extension of that load balancer, that you put these switches inside of front-end code so that users can only see the features that are in their kind of safe, stable mode, and you only flip the feature flag when you're ready for customers to see that new feature, and provides a degree of safety. But I think there really are some new use cases coming out, and so my understanding starts to feel like maybe a decade old. So Jakan, maybe you can kind of catch us up. What are some of the use cases that real modern feature flags are really about?
Yeah. I think you're definitely right in that, like, feature flag nowadays is a lot less binary than like the model you were describing, like the blue-green model. So like typically you see engineering teams using feature flags to like slowly or targeted roll out their features to their users. But let's talk about like a modern example, right? The most modern example I can think of is like the AI companies, right? The AI companies nowadays, they're like launching new models, new versions of their like machine learning models to their customers. And they don't just launch it in one shot. They use like feature flags to make sure that, only part of their users get the newest model so that they can test how the model is performing with their users on the metrics that they care about before they launch it to the rest of their user. So that's like one good example of a modern use case.
Cody?
Yeah, I think that's a great example. You use the example of blue-green with the load balancer in front of it, and I think where I would start is, imagine if you didn't have to have the load balancer and you just have it built into that same application. You don't have to deploy an entire separate stack to test out a new version. So a feature flag lets you wrap different aspects of your application, different code, in a decision. Then maybe you want to be able to test against specific groups, or you want to be able to change the experience based on some sort of a configuration. Feature flags let you do that. They unlock the ability to test things in production, to be able to roll things out to targeted groups. And like, to Jacob's point, when I think of like modern feature flag usage, it goes beyond just being able to turn on or off a part of a web page, and it gets into like really interesting things around how you can truly change like the experience that someone's getting from back-end systems, front-end systems, and start to roll out a different experience. But it's all about that control, and it's about, to just build on your example, taking that load balancer concept and saying, I don't need to deploy two completely separate things to achieve this. I can blue-green within my application, or I can blue, green, yellow, teal, orange, different configurations within there. I ran out of colors because that's where my color knowledge stops.
Yeah, and I'd like to sort of riff on that a little bit as well. You mentioned the blue-green sort of either on or off, and any interesting application these days is probably going to be running with dozens or hundreds of feature flags, all of which are being added, used, removed, a different life cycle. The blue-green thing is a very like everything or nothing, and software these days needs much finer grained delivery, much finer grained measurement, stuff like that. And so indeed, as you're saying, the industry has moved on, realizing you need something much more fine grained than just a blue-green.
I think that the two most compelling use cases for feature flags, I mean, really, when we're talking about feature flags, we're talking about separating the deployment of code from the release of a feature. And so if you're doing a deployment that has, let's say, 10 features in it, and one of those features has a major bug, in a traditional blue-green, you'd have to roll back all 10 features, including the 9 features that were working just fine. But with feature flags, you now have that kill switch, or almost like this fine-grained rollback that you can do just for that buggy feature. And that enables increasing velocity up to and including being able to do crazy things like testing in production, right? We can now release a feature into production and only turn it on for our QA team, for instance. Really speeding up that delivery velocity while reducing risk of change.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really helpful catch up for me. I hope it was for others as well. But one of the things that's still kind of like sticking in my head is like I'm thinking of feature flags as an if statement in code. And if that's the case, like why is it that people should buy something for helping manage feature flags? So maybe Connor, I'll just bounce it right back to you.
At the end of the day, feature flags are what one of my customers calls Boolean variable as a service, right? We're just turning on and off an if statement. So it seems like there's not really much complexity with that. But I feel like where the complexity really comes in is, since we're talking about making changes in our application in production, right? We would never allow something that simple to be done without proper governance and proper automation and audit around that. Many of folks, including my last job, we had database toggles, right? It was just a way to toggle on and off a value in a database, which ultimately made that was a very like engineering focus change without any of the change management process that needed to be wrapped around what we already had around, like doing code deployments, right? So that's really where I see is the biggest complexity comes in, that once you start trying to integrate it with all the other processes that are used within an organization for releasing changes, at that point, it's not just a Boolean variable, right?
Yeah, and another aspect of this is that maintaining that Boolean variable as a service yourself can get very expensive. My previous employer was a good sized company, 300, 400 engineers, I think. They had an in-house feature flagging system, and it was hard to use. It was not well maintained. It was opaque. The only people who could really see the state of the world were the engineers. And even for them, it was not an easy way to see what's going on. So, product managers couldn't see what was going on. Again, it wasn't maintained well. It didn't have a lot of features because the core business of the company was not maintaining their Boolean value as a service. So I think that's one reason why you sort of choose to buy this kind of service.
Yeah, I think I look at this a lot like layers of complexity. Sure, if all you want is the Boolean experience, just turning on a part of a page, that is a pretty straightforward thing. But the immediate next step, and I think we would all agree, is like immediate next step is going to be, I want only my QA team to receive this change, or some segmented group, right? I only want this specific group, and then I want to be able to roll out further. And writing that logic is hard. And then saying, well, I want 50% of the West Coast users. Writing the logic to handle that in your code is harder. Making sure it's set up globally so that everybody gets a consistent value back at the same time is also hard and takes infrastructure. Being able to handle more than just the Boolean use case, like strings and JSON flags and numeric flags, that's another set of logic that you have to handle. And so with every layer of complexity in your code, you're introducing more complex requirements around how you actually want to be able to build feature flags around it. And to Deej's point, before too long, you're now operating an entire platform on your own and spending your own company's like engineering resources to manage a tool to ship your real company software. And so it only makes sense at that point to say we can offload the complexity of this to a company that understands this problem, that is developing for us from the staffing people to support this problem, as opposed to building it all ourselves and trying to handle all the variables of complexity and those layers on our own.
Yeah, and just to build on top of that, right? Like with all that layers of complexity, which in many cases nowadays is actually really necessary for your business, right? To be able to like target it, to roll out targeted to some customers, not just everyone in one shot. And that's like a very important aspect. And to be able to build a system like that, I would say like today, feature flagging is really a commodity that like is readily available. All of our platforms actually support these features really well. It's not something that you actually need to build yourself. Just similar to why you wouldn't want to build your own data warehouses, right? Because like it's just not cost efficient. Like a good feature flagging solution probably costs less than one engineer's cost, but like you will definitely need to fund a team to build it. Like that will take more than one engineer to do so. And like, so if you end up found a team with 1 or 2 engineers to build it, you end up either scheme on reliability or you scheme on some of the core features that you think you might not need, but in reality, that could cause you a lot of trouble down the road. So like, this is usually something that we don't recommend users to build themselves. And maybe to cap it off, I can like share a story of Knight Capital, Knight with a K. This is like an infamous example of a company that was like having more than $1 billion revenue, but went down just due to a mistake in using the feature flagging system. Basically, they were developing like a high frequency trade algorithm that were ready to be launched. And they were right in that they want to put it behind the feature flag so that they can control the rollout. But what the mistake they made, one is that they were not good at cleaning up old feature flags. So they had flags that were in the system for years. And in this one, there was a flag that was in the system for 8 years at the time. I think it was 2012. And then they decided, the second mistake they made was that they decided to repurpose that feature flag for this new trading algorithm. So the code for the old feature was still in the system, and then they were trying to deploy the new code. Long story short, basically as soon as they turned on the feature flag, which was also still getting the old code, it turned on an algorithm that was buying stocks, options nonstop, and it took them about an hour to turn it off, and it cost them $500 million, which caused the company to basically go under in a day. So yeah, like features like this that would flag your engineers to clean up code, to not repurpose feature flags for other purposes, and also alert you when there are mistakes that are being made, are very important as things that you typically don't think about building when you're building your own system, and are actually very important.
Thanks, Jack. And I actually am quite inspired by that story, because one of the things that I heard at a Agile conference back in the day was kind of picking up on Connor's point about the separation of deployment and release. But a kind of interesting facet of it is that then not only is deployment a different activity, it's a thing that developers do. It's how you get code into production, and release becomes a business decision. which kind of implies, and I think it's been implied in some of your use cases and some of the stories across this, that really feature flags are not just the if statement and therefore not just something for engineers. They're things that cause new kinds of collaborations within a team. So maybe we could kind of kick around, and Jack kind of can kick it back right to you to say, you know, what are some of the collaborations that you see teams adopt when they have feature flags?
Yeah, definitely love this topic. So like I talked about this earlier, when you nowadays feature rollout is not binary, right? Like you don't typically just roll out the feature in one shot. You want to roll it out slowly. You want to know how it's doing to your customer, to your users before you actually decide to ship it to everyone. So we typically like to think about this as like an A/B test. And a lot of companies nowadays think about feature rollout and the experimentation as like two very different concepts. But in reality, when you're rolling out a feature, it is just an A/B test. So like, you know, where we see this actually, if you consider every feature to be like a A/B test, this is where you see the whole team actually come together to care about the outcome of every feature. You know, from PMs to designers to like engineers and data scientists, everyone cares about how much a feature has rolled out to, how well it's doing in terms of your product metrics, your business metrics, your like infra reliability metrics, and what decision we should make, right? Or like what learning we should get from this feature rollout. So we see teams who adopted to like this kind of collaborative model really become self-optimizing. They can learn from the features that release, they build, and then they can make decisions that are based on that, and also inform future decisions using this kind of, you know, past feature experiences.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that in traditional development environments and traditional software development, the developer becomes this single point of all things, right? Something breaks, they call the developer at 2 a.m. to come in and repush the code or build a new thing. But as like platforms start to come up and these concepts start to become more mainstream, what you find is that ultimately the people involved in a software release and in the release of a new feature or new functionality span across the entire organization. It's developers who are building the code and shipping it. It's the operations teams who are watching for when something goes wrong and disabling problem features with like a kill switch. It's to Jocko's point, like the data scientist teams who want to understand like how a feature is being used. It's product managers who want to understand, are they reaching goals that they had outlined around a feature release, or changing targeting rules, right? The developer is not the person who wants to control who's consuming a feature. That's usually a product manager who understands the target customer for something that's being released. I think organizations that lean in on this get this collaboration, they get this agility out of it, where they realize that all of these groups have some part to play in the way software is released now. It's not just a developer problem anymore, because it lets developers get back to the thing that they care the most about, building and pushing code, while the other teams take on their individual parts of the software release lifecycle.
Absolutely. And in my mind, some of this goes back to the build versus buy question, which is that all the modern feature flagging offerings have integration tools. They have ways to broadcast to, you know, Slack or Teams or something like that. Hey, this feature flag has changed. It allows, you know, for example, you're sitting in your customer support group and customers are suddenly reporting a problem. You can go look and say, oh, we just turned flag on. I can turn it off, or I can let the product manager turn it off immediately and stem the problem before it gets out of hand. You usually have displays in the application that shows the state of, you know, a whole set of feature flags, so you can audit, you know, the CEO can see what the state of the application is without going and trolling through some database. It is indeed, as the others have said, an issue which is of concern. You know, the release of the software, the state of the software is of interest to everyone, and having different displays of that information helps everyone have a much clearer idea of what's going on.
Yeah, feature management it's a cross-functional role, right? So there's obvious use cases of feature flags, like operational engineering use cases, things like enabling trunk-based development. So me as a developer, when I'm done coding my code, I can merge it into main that wrapped around a flag. And now I can move on to my next sprint. And now my product team can release that feature when they are ready, when the marketing schedule is ready, everyone's trained, it's ready to go. And on that topic, like from product management perspective, feature flags enable things like testing and iterating, right? Having multiple variations of a feature, which is not necessarily an engineering or operational use case, right? And then lastly, also a pretty common use case is around entitlements, right? Like being able to beta test features and having a group of users that are my beta testers, and you know, enabling a feature just for them so we can confirm that it's good before it gets released more widely. Ultimately, that's not really a development use case, right? That's not an operational use case. That's definitely a product management use case.
That's quite interesting, Connor, because one of the features that Jira Software recently released is to kind of catch up to that idea. We talked about it in terms of progressive delivery, which brings in some of those early steps that developers do have to do to get things ready. But to your point, more of the product management kinds of things that happen along the way. To, you know, like I guess it kind of says that release isn't just a point in time anymore. It's a span of time. And another aspect was that we were kind of, David, you mentioned that a lot of these tools have integration. So I guess I'm kind of wondering how and why it's important to integrate feature flagging tools with a project management tool like Jira. Connor, let me flip it back to you.
Yeah, I think there's kind of two concepts to think about there. First being a feature is typically kind of a one-to-one or related to a user story, for instance, right? Where we're defining a new experience or a new capability that our users are going to be using. That should be how you start with feature flags, in my opinion. And so from that perspective, having for every ticket you have in Jira, or every user story you have defined in Jira, here's the feature flag for enabling that. And now from a product management perspective, we can say, we're ready to release this new module, or ready to release this new experience. And it's very relatable from that perspective. I think the second common use case of why to map back to or integrate with work tracking is around approvals, right? Using the Jira ticket as this, like, are we allowed to release this? Has it in approved state? Is it done in a done state? And actually have that Jira ticket status be our release gate to have some kind of governance and controls over how features get released.
Yeah, and I would add to that, realistically, anyone building software these days is living in Jira all the time. It is the center, the source of truth, the center of everything. You wake up in the morning, you open up Jira, what do I have to do today? So having that tight interaction with your flagging platform, so you can be creating Jira issues saying, today we want to ramp up to 50%, or today I want to remove the feature flag from this. It just, the release process, I like the comment a moment ago of release is not a moment in time, it's a period of time. Keeping track of all the things you need to do is a little bit more labor intensive. Huge benefits for that labor, but it's a little more labor intensive. And so having that tied into Jira so you can offload your thinking to Jira is a big, big boon.
Yeah, to that point, I really like what you said there. I think that I'm a big proponent of meeting your users, or developers in this case, where they're at. They're spending most of their time in Jira, not most of the time, they're spending a lot of their time in Jira today, right? They're building software, they're understanding their user stories, they're interacting with this platform already, and forcing them to go into a different platform to get visibility into their feature flags is not in the spirit of meeting them where they're at. It's trying to drive our own goal of getting them into our own platform. But if we can make the developer experience better by giving them access right alongside where their issues tracking is at, where their user stories tracking is at, be able to understand what's on versus off, impact those changes there. That's a good thing for our users. It makes their workflow better. It keeps them more engaged in what they're actually trying to accomplish. So again, I like meeting people, meeting our users where they're at, integrations like Jira make that possible, because if they're already there, we want to be there with them, helping them work better.
Yeah, definitely. I would say like feature rollout is actually just a part of like the life cycle of a task, right? Like your task does not end when your feature is implemented. It ends when you have made a decision on the feature and ship it to everyone, or maybe kill it entirely. But like the rollout of a feature is part of the life cycle of tracking. So really it should just be in one place, which is Jira. So like, right now today, if you're not using Jira to track the rollout, you're tracking your specs, your design, your implementation status, and the decision. But a part of that is missing. The big part is the rollout status. So having that being tracked in the Jira issue is a good way for everyone on your team. I guess I'm going back to the collaborative topic where, your designers, your PMs, and data scientists, they want to know what's the status of this feature that I took part in, what's the metrics, how it's doing. So, all of that managed in one place is definitely great.
Okay. I think though that I've heard some really compelling things here, but I know there's a skepticism in everybody's mind about the overhead, and especially for those who aren't steeped in feature flags. I think they look at this idea of putting a bunch of if statements in their code, and they worry like, man, isn't there some overhead there? And I think there is a general awareness of the kind of intentional technical debt that feature flags incur. But I wonder if folks here who have kind of, or on the other end of the spectrum, have a lot of experience with it, could help some of those starting out with some tips about how to maintain those, how to keep it from getting overwhelming. Jaikan, let's go right back to you.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been an engineer for many years, and I use feature flags for pretty much every feature that I write. I would say, sure, there is a little bit of overhead of like managing it and writing that if statement for every feature that you write, but the benefit that you get from comparing to the overhead is so worth it. Like it gives you the peace of mind that when your feature has a bug, when your feature has any issue in production, you have the option to roll it back. You don't just ruin your product for everyone. That's like a big plus. And no matter, in addition, like there are all the benefits of like slow rollout, targeting tests, those are benefits. I'm not gonna get too much into the weeds on that, but like in terms of like best practice, right? I would say definitely use it very often, use it for as many features that you write as you can. And also, I would not clean up one by one. What I would recommend is like, set some cadence. But by the way, this is like good for my own personal experience. You might want your own cadence. But for me personally, I like to clean up all my feature gates that are like stale, can be cleaned up every like quarter. So every quarter I spend like 2 days just to do that, go through my code and decide which feature flags are stale. They can be just they can just be removed from code and just do that. And I guess another thing is like a lot of platforms on the market have tools that have features that will let you know which are the features that are passing for all of your users or failing for all of your users. Those are good targets for you to go clean up. So when you use these platforms, you can actually, you don't have to manually find these targets. You should be able to just have a list that you can just go clean them up.
Yeah, I think I might be a little bit of a contrarian on this answer, but I think there's a ground floor idea too of like which flags are permanent versus which ones do you want to be temporary, because there are definitely times where you want to have a permanent flag in place. You want to modify permanent functionality, like something like an entitlement. We talked about that earlier, like some form of a configuration that you want to stay in and you want to have the agility of a feature flag around that. And so at a ground floor, like understanding from a maintenance standpoint, which one of these are ones that we have to do, prolonged maintenance on, or we want to be able to pull out eventually, and ones that should be slotted. So you want to have some sort of mechanism to tag the ones that are permanent as permanent and understand which ones you want to tear out. I think there's a lot of options around like managing those. All of us likely have some level of API integrations, Terraform controls to be able to pull things in and out. But I think when it comes to inside of your code, you want good visibility there. There's tooling out on the market that'll scan code and help you understand where feature flags are in place. So being aware of that, paying attention into your feature management platform to see which one, like what things are being evaluated, which versions of your feature flag or variations are being evaluated. And as you see it trending down to like the previous versions, starting to understand the things that Jochen said, like being able to go in and clean out these ones that are no longer being used. You definitely don't want to leave every feature flag in place for all time, because when you do get around to cleaning it up, it's going to take you a very long time to pull all of these out. So you want to be proactive on it, but I think start at the ground floor and understanding which ones you want to be permanent and which ones eventually will go away. Take you a long way in getting started in managing like the life cycle of a feature flag.
And I add to that as well. All the feature flag vendors are providing some sort of SDK. Sometimes you can wrap the SDK with some idiomatic structure around it, which makes it easier for you to manage or manage the feature flags in the code, make them more transparent. I've written a blog post on that. It's an ongoing issue, but I think that there's lots of ways to mitigate what seems like pain there. It's also quite possible to tag individual flags with their state, and so as your whatever flagging system you use, you can say this is early, this has been released, this is fully done. You can be using Jira too to keep track of the things.
I mean, we all agree flags provide a ton of value, but they also can become technical debt. I think we kind of need to accept that as fact so that the risk can be managed appropriately, right? As Jochen was saying, first you need to know if a flag is stale, with maybe nudges or notifications to developers that a flag's totally rolled out, we're not iterating on it anymore, you can take it out of your code. And then it sounds like really the consensus of this group here is that you have to have code cleanup, flag cleanup, part of your development lifecycle. It needs to just be included and accepted as part of that fact. Some of the most exciting innovations that I'm seeing in the industry is really done around like automated code cleanup. Tools existing for like actually automating the process of creating a PR with auto-generated code like of the code cleaned up. So now it's not a developer spending a bunch of time trying to figure out how to do that. It can be kind of completely automated. That's where I see kind of where things are going with feature flags.
So kind of this is really really interesting. So we kind of hit on the past, my 10-year-old understanding of feature flags. We talked about current state, and you kind of got us into a little bit of where you see things going. So I'd like to really kind of open that up to all of us as we wind down the conversation, get ready for some questions from the audience. But Connor, maybe just kind of elaborate on that. Where like that sounds pretty cool, like having something take care of all that code cleanup. But do you see some other places where feature flags are going in the future?
Yeah, I mean, getting back to the original concept of a feature flag release is just as impactful and important as a code deployment, right? We have operations teams that have all sorts of alerts and monitoring around, is the application up and running? Is it functioning properly? And so I think really now, if as organizations start using feature flags more consistently, you need to also be monitoring the health of a feature flag, and that all the way up to and including understanding, when I turned on this flag, did that introduce a performance impact, or is it now all of a sudden my application is generating a bunch of errors? Those types of things need to be considered, and that's really the hard part of feature flags is many times, and that's what many of these solutions are providing, is kind of tying change events like a flag being turned on back to the customer impact or infrastructure impact or application impact as well, up to and including even cost impact, right? Like we turn on this flag and now suddenly our bill is going up in our cloud vendor because we're generating more logs or whatever it might be. Like that's a really hard problem to solve for and to identify. That's where I see like opportunities for the industry to kind of solve that problem.
I like to say here that I have a coworker who likes to quote William Gibson, who I've said something like, the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And I think that that's the case with feature flags. There are a lot of if people haven't used feature flags, they're sort of thinking, oh, I need to turn, I turn this feature on. That's a great novel capability. But we're all alluding here to there's a lot more that comes in beyond that. And companies that aren't taking advantage of all the second order effects from adding feature flags into their code, into their product are really missing out on opportunities, developer velocity, happy developers, and happy businesses. The opportunities, the capabilities are here right and now. You just need to take advantage of them.
And to that point, I think in the technology space, we probably all have a good chuckle about this, that like a lot of these things when they first hit the market, they're high complexity bar, and there's a lot of very like developer centric things about them, and they reach this point of adoption where UX starts to take a front seat, and it starts to become consumable. And we already talked about scale and teams and all that stuff earlier, but I think to me the future of this is very similar to what you said. Like it's here now. What we're seeing is things like user experience of your platforms are becoming so much more important. And the way feature flags are used to improve the experience of users, or to be able to dynamically change aspects of the application based on conditions. We talked about database rollouts earlier, but like, what about when you can use feature flags to dynamically change what region someone's connecting to based on their location, right? I think that these are ways we can impact user experience are going to come to the forefront, ways we can measure that experience, act on that measurement, how we can continue to iterate and change that. I think it really is going back to a place of how can we make sure we're putting the best functionality in front of users and actually getting better things in front of them faster, as opposed to just simplifying developer lifecycle, which is obviously important. We want, to Dave's point, we want happy developers who are excited to build, but we also want happy users. And I think that's where feature flagging is going in kind of its current and next chapter.
Yeah, definitely agree with all of you. Product observability is the word that we like to use to describe what we think, feature flag is going. So like, a lot of people think about feature flag as like how you can control every feature that's on your website, in your app, who gets which experience. But really, if you understand how every feature is doing, if you put every feature behind the feature flag, and you also know how each feature is impacting, your user metrics, your business, then what you really have is this like product observability, right? Hey, this button on this website is like improving our conversion. And then that new landing page is, driving more signups. All of that, you will be able to tie that to the actual impact on your product. I think that's like how I would just describe where this is going for a lot of us.
Very cool. Well, I think we're going to start trying to grab some of these questions. I guess I'm already looking at enough that I know we aren't going to get to all of them. So I'm going to do a little cherry picking here, but again, we will get some, as a group, spend some time making sure that all of these get answers to the best of our ability, and we get these up on the Atlassian community for the benefit of all. The first one's quite, the one I wanted to pick up here is a bit interesting about any recommendations for setting up naming conventions for different types of feature flags.
Of course, that's the first question. The hardest thing in computer science is naming things, right? I always think, like I mentioned earlier, naming a flag, or rather a flag in general, it should be related to the experience that the user is going to have. A user story or some kind of way of, the same way you describe it in the JIRA ticket should be how you name your flag. It's got to be more relatable and understandable by everyone outside of the individual engineers, up to and including if your solution provides for it, have the description of the flag be a link back to the JIRA ticket, right? So we can have this kind of mapping of these two things. Makes it easier to cross-reference.
Are you saying we can't use Star Wars planets as the names for our feature flags?
Unless you want to be the guy that gets pinged every day saying, what does this one do?
So I'm gonna, the next one is quite interesting. A big part of software delivery is testing. As feature flags introduce more variations, how do you see testing fitting with feature flags?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So obviously you want to test the feature that you just wrote, but a lot of times you as one person cannot cover all the edge cases. It could just be that you didn't think about all the edge cases, or sometimes it's just because you're on a device that does not have a bug, but your feature actually has a bug on a different device. So typically, if you put a feature behind the feature gate, what we recommend you doing is that you give it to your coworkers, the rest of your company. So all of the feature flagging system solution should allow you to say, hey, only roll out this feature to employees or to people who are not in production environment, so that you can have a dogfooding session, dogfooding period, where people who are okay with having bugs in your product are actually have the time to catch them and then to report to you before you ship it to the rest of your users. And then a step further is some companies have their alpha, beta tier users who are also more okay to accept some buggy experience than their production users. So after you have finished this dogfooding period, you could also roll it out to users on those tiers and just let them give you feedback on if you have any bugs or any bad experience for these features. And then after all of that, you can we're seeing people just roll out their features to their users partially, not in one shot. So roll it out to 10%, 15% of your users, see how those users are doing comparing to the rest 90%, and then use that to see if your feature is actually providing a good experience or not crashing the apps. I guess contrary to certain beliefs, you can not only measure product metrics, but also crashes, latencies, and those kind of stuff. Those usually are good indicators of whether your feature is causing regressions in the environment.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe I'll pick up on that and the fact that you had or the story that you brought up earlier about Night Capital, because this one asks, with large teams that are working together, how can we ensure that some team members don't accidentally turn on features or target the wrong user?
Well, I can comment on that. I mean, at the most simplest, I mean, you can be using Jira and have the person who owns the ticket owns that decision. But many of these feature flagging systems actually do have some kind of capability to limit who can make those changes. So you could, for example, set up so only the product manager can change how the flag is being released, how it's being targeted. You may also be able to get a log of what changes have been made by who, when. All these provide a lot more control over it, so you don't have someone accidentally bumping a targeting rule to deploy it to everyone when you're not ready for that, and allows you to see when things have been done and by who.
This next one is interesting to me. It's a story I've even heard within Atlassian. I've used feature toggling systems before, and it's great at first, but at some point there are just a lot of flags in the code and everything gets messy. What can be done about that?
Yeah, I can take this one. I think it's going back to my technology comments from earlier. I think we have a habit of when we get really excited as technologists about a technology, we jump all in on it. And I think we would all agree we want customers creating feature flags. We want them building features. It's a practice we want people to do. But like anything, you can overdo these things at times. And you can, if every feature has 4 sub features inside of that feature that are being controlled, you might be over rotating slightly. And so being really intentional about the functionality that you want to get off, the test cases that you want to be able to satisfy, the things you want to measure, and breaking that code up into manageable chunks early on is really important. Making sure you have a good mapping of the functionality you're trying to either measure, trying to roll out, trying to control. Having a really good grip on that and building your feature flags around that is a very important thing. It'll go a long way. It's not the most fun answer because it does require planning, and a lot of it is a process thing of making sure that your approach to this is handled to taking good development practices, and similar to how we approach writing functions for things. You want to make sure your feature flags have a purpose and that they're controlling a specific thing that you want to ultimately have that good control over. you have one thing that's only changing once every year. Should that be a permanent feature flag? Should it always be there? Like there's just good considerations to make there. So again, a lot of it is around planning and making sure that you're separating things out in a very logical way that breaks your code down into manageable blocks. So you can do what Connor talked about earlier, the whole breaking apart deploy from release thing.
Oh, that's so great. I really appreciate all of the audience's questions. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to call it right there, but please do look for our answers posted soon. Generally, I really appreciate the conversation from the feature flag experts here. Thank you so much for your time. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you some more as we continue to build our integrations together. Thanks so much.